Chapter 251 Customized Soul World by Hydesgrain. Jason decided to focus on his alchemy progress, martial art techniques, and affinity practice until the tournament would finally start, while he also told himself multiple times to only practice the Heaven's Hell technique if he had enough time left. As such, instead of focusing on his soul energy, Jason decided to adjust himself to his physique that was already comparable to normal second expert ranks. There was still a difference towards evolved ranked beasts, but he estimated that it wouldn't be long until his physique was refined to such a degree in order to fight evolved beasts head-on, without the usage of mana, which would probably shock most citizens on Asterix, because it was unheard that a normal youth who was only at the adept rank was able to defeat evolved beasts without using mana at all. Without being a prodigy or someone from a big family who learned martial art techniques since their childhood, it was unlikely to be able to do something similar to that. There were exceptions, with one of them having a high-quality, physical soul world, which would allow one to attain a strong physique without an extremely high-ranked soul bond at the mid-late unblemished rank. Smiling foolishly, the whole week passed silently and Jason's body felt much lighter compared to before, which caused him to accidentally crush Greg while sparring because his physique was neither further refined nor had they the same unrefined physical rank. This shocked not only Greg but also Malia, who watched the whole fight, if one could even call it a fight, because it was more like Jason beat her brother into a pulp without much difficulty. Suppressing his strength, Jason and Greg fought against each other head-on while honing their respective martial arts skill. However, compared to before, Jason was somewhat dissatisfied with this, which led him to suppress his strength further in order to feel pressure pushing him down before he exerted his martial art techniques while at the same time trying to use his affinities. Since Scorpio and Artemis established their fortified soul conjunction with him, Jason felt as if it was much easier to control their affinities, which was advantageous in order to have a shorter reaction interval, while everything was even better with his Black Origin Flame. His Black Origin Flame affinity was considered his soul bond per set, and instructing it what to do was immediately executed, without a slight disruption, while his partially refined physique further supported fire affinities, accelerating its circulation to a certain degree, decreasing the interval between his short order and execution by a large margin. Being overwhelmed by Greg felt extremely beneficial in accordance to his proficiency, which soared, even if Greg looked at him annoyed and frustrated when Jason suppressed himself further. As if that was not enough, Jason also started to bother Malia about spars, because he knew that she was extremely strong with her third Master Mana Core rank, which she entered during the last month. She was less proficient in close combat, yet she liked to fight long range with her wand and two affinities, which she clearly showed Jason. In the end, both her rank and proficiency with the water and fire affinity were extremely high, and firing simple water jets and fireballs at Jason was already difficult and tiring to evade. However, with this, a sudden thought emerged in his mind, and Jason continued to bother Malia that she should give her best to hit him, while he started to exert his weightless steps technique to its limits, without caring about anything else. At the same time, he instructed his Black Origin Flame to start an experiment with all kinds of movements in order to figure out possible ways to further increase his speed. Since he had to run away from two magical ranked crystal horned pythons, Jason felt the urgency to attain a high velocity, in order to either flee or, if he was at an advantage, he could even attack with his high speed, before the opponent was able to react. Only a single week passed between him concocting his first perfect purified grade 1 potion and New Year, yet he was able to manufacture 10 more perfect potions, while his remaining several dozen potions he concocted were relatively close to perfectly purified. But even more important was that there were only 3 failed products, which further decreased his failure rate by a large margin. This was a great leap in his success rate, and Jason felt extremely satisfied with his current progress when he heard that the ingredients would arrive a few days after the New Year, causing him to feel slightly disturbed. It was not as if he felt incapable of concocting the easiest evolution solution, but the pressure from the possible failure weighed heavy on him. But even if he felt the pressure from the news about the arrival of the required ingredients for Taurus Bloodline Unsealing Potion, Jason felt exactly the same pressure, radiating from his surroundings and everything that happened throughout the last few months. Figuring out that he might be a half-Celestia was only the tip of the iceberg, while the revamped cultivation ranks and knowing that humanity was only comparable to livestock for the foreign races was even difficult to digest. But as if that was not enough, Jason was unsure how he should behave if he were to see old Drake again, while he remained in contact with Seren and Eve until. Apparently, the two of them would also leave Asterix once their mission was finished, and Seren already told him that their task was to capture his second soulbond, which was a Guardian-ranked cub, which caused Jason to praise his naive friend inwardly. Seren was extremely naive in his opinion. Even if he was bullied for being a cripple and so on, he remained optimistic, which was a good point, while his naive belief in humanity's kindness was weird, compared to the fact that he was the descendant of one of the big clans that reigned an island. However, in the end, Jason wouldn't be able to change his friend's mindset, even if he wanted to, which was however not the case, because he had more than enough work to do with himself. Nevertheless, even if there was more than enough for him to do, today, on New Year's Eve, he was told by the Flays that he should take a break, at least for one day. In the beginning, Jason wanted to reject their proposal, but after they told him that it was important to relax and have fun for some time, he just nodded his head. He was extremely exhausted from trying to improve everything at once over the whole day, almost without any sleep or a single day he skipped to practice anything at all. As such, Jason took off his first day since half a year in order to talk with the Flays about all kinds of things, which included their school life, the upcoming tournament, and much more, before they started to eat. As everyone summoned their soulbonds, Jason also released Artemis and Scorpio for the first time in a while, which caused Artemis to screech out in joy, while Scorpio did the same. The only difference between the two was that one was an over 2-meter-long scorpion that sounded rather cruel and horrifying, while Artemis was a 1.2-meter-long owl with fluffy plumage and a gentler voice. It was also the first time for the Flays to see Scorpio after his evolution, and the Flays were shocked to see that the small miniature Parascores changed to such a shocking degree. Noticing the joy radiating from Artemis and Scorpio because they were finally allowed to leave the Soul World, Jason felt bad, and he began to wonder how boring it would be to stay within the Soul World for over a month without anything to do, except using their soul connection with Jason to communicate with him and see through his eyes, which was only possible thanks to the fortified soul conjunction. Is there a way to change the Soul World into a more comfortable and maybe even fun place? Jason mumbled to himself, when Mark, who already warmed up to him, suddenly said, "Of course that's possible, but the required soul energy is extremely high while the benefits are almost nil. You are still young and you need the vacant soul energy in order to contract more, stronger soul bonds, which is why I recommend you to not change too much within your soul world for now." Hearing what Mark said, Jason averted his gaze, as he asked with curiosity gleaming in his eyes, "How can I change the interior of my soul world?" Maybe he already read it somewhere or his masters told him, but he just couldn't remember. However, when he heard Mark telling him that it brought him nil benefits to change the interior of his soul world, Jason immediately knew that his masters wouldn't tell him something without any benefits. It is a rather counterproductive measure, but you can even bind objects to your soul and let them enter your soul world in order to decorate or change the interior. Like this, Gabriella and I started to gather soul energy in order to contract all kinds of plants, trees, bushes, even stones, and so on to create a comfortable environment for our contracted soul bonds, because we don't call them out often. As such, they don't think it's boring or uncomfortable within the soul world, and staying within may even be more comfortable for them instead of being summoned out of it. However, we only started with this process after our soul world space was completely occupied by beasts, which allowed us to save soul energy units to bind other stuff to customize our soul world. Listening carefully, Jason was immediately interested in the information Mark told him. Does that mean I can customize my own soul world? I don't even know how large my soul world currently is, because it's consistently increasing in size with the increase of soul energy units, and now, Mark tells me that I can bind normal trees and so on to plant into my soul world. If Jason were to say that he was not shocked, it would definitely be a lie, and Gabriella noticed that, as she said, even if creating a comfortable habitat for your soul bonds is important later on in order to thicken your bond with each other, the required soul energy is extremely large. For example, to bind a single, common large flux oak tree, I had to accumulate several thousand soul energy, while it also required a large amount of nutritious soil, which I also had to bind to my soul world. In the end, you would have to build your own ecosystem inside your soul world, which is extremely difficult, to put it simply. Just imagine the difficulty of raising a tree in a completely empty area, without any nutrition, sun rays for the tree to utilize photosynthesis, and you would also need water. You have to provide everything, otherwise, the living beings you bind to your soul world will die, and even if it won't damage your soul world, you would have wasted the used soul energy to bind the tree. Please don't act carelessly and think about your priorities. Gabriella's words caused Jason's curiosity to die down almost immediately because he couldn't imagine a way to customize his world while supplying everything with their required needs to survive, except if he were to use stones and other objects that were not alive, to begin with. In the end, I also don't have any soul energy to spare, who knows, when I need it. He thought, before promising his soul bonds inwardly, that he will take them out more often from now on. Even if it might take years for him to build his own small, customized world, knowing that something like this was possible, ignited his interest. Chapter 252 New Year by Hydesgrain. Jason was always curious to figure out new things, and hearing about the possibility to customize his soul world, he was intrigued, even if it may take a while before he would be able to do something like this. Mark said that there was no benefit in it, but Jason felt different because Gabriella said that it may thicken the soul connection between him and his soul bonds, which was definitely a huge advantage. Because he already formed two fortified soul conjunctions with a different thick connection, Jason was fully aware of the positive aspect of a thicker soul connection, even if it may not seem much from others' perspectives. Alone the difference in manifesting his soul bonds body parts when they occupied his mana core was more than enough to tell him that a thicker soul connection was important, while the same seemed to apply for affinities. Apparently, not only his own proficiency towards the utilized affinity was important, but also the soul connection to the soul bond that provided the affinity, which was something Jason figured out only recently. As such, a small difference in the thickness of the soul connection between each other may even result in barely surviving a dreadful encounter or dying by a hair length, which Jason obviously wanted to avoid. Noting down the possibility to customize his soul world, Jason felt satisfied, as the Flays changed the subject, and Gabriella asked the three what they planned to achieve during the next year. Mark and Gabriella looked at the three youths with interest, wondering what the goals were. And hearing this question, Jason began to ponder because he never really thought about that. What do I want to achieve throughout the next year? Without being sure what he wanted to achieve, Jason decided to hear out what Greg and Malia wanted to accomplish before, but even that didn't really seem to help him out. I want to break into the master stage, be the strongest 15-year-old on Asterix with Taurus help, before going to Canir to widen my horizon and search for my second soul bond. Hearing this, Jason couldn't help but smile, because it was roughly the same goal he initially picked out for himself, before his whole worldview was shattered with the arrival of the foreign races and him being able to decipher the universal language all races seemed to use. The knowledge he received from the two blessed or rather Terragrade manuals was too shocking, and Jason was not sure if traveling to Canir could be labeled as widening one's horizon. Averting his gaze towards Malia, she seemed to hesitate, as she uncertainly said, I want to break into the Magus rank before the end of the year, which caused the remaining Flay family members to halt in their tracks for a moment before they nodded. It was good to be ambitious, even though it would be difficult to break through 6 levels in the master rank and compress the gaseous mana into a liquid drop in only 1 year, because it took a huge amount of effort to do the latter. If it was before, Jason could say that this was extremely difficult to achieve, but thinking for some time, he figured out that the plan he formed in his mind was even more ridiculous, the more he thought about it, which caused him to smile lightly. Still pondering for a moment, if he should say it or now, Jason lifted his head before he seriously said, I want to break into the low lick state, a Magus rank until the end of the year. Saying this, Jason stopped saying anything else, while the Flays seemed to behave as if time itself stopped, as they neither moved nor said anything at all. Suddenly a loud, huh? You want what? Voice through the room, and it was Greg who was completely stupefied about his best friend's announcement. It would already be extremely difficult for Malia, who wanted to reach the Magus rank before the age of 18, but now, Jason wanted to do the same when he was 15 years and several months old. This shocked the Flays extremely, and even if Jason would receive a lot of support from his mysterious master, he accepted, it would still be a miracle because he was currently barely at the 6th Adept rank. He would have to break through 3 more levels in the Adept rank before he was eligible to break into the Expert rank, and then Jason wanted to break through 2 additional ranks in order to become a Magus by compressing and liquefying his mana. If it were someone else, the Flays would label him as someone insane, without a single trace of sanity left inside his brain, but it was Jason who announced it, which complicated everything somehow. Looking into his eyes, there was not a single tinge of a joke in his eyes, and he was obviously completely serious about this, causing everyone to be utterly shocked. Maybe he fell on his head during the last month. Or maybe it was already inside the 4-star rift, they thought, and Jason couldn't help but think that their mindset was right. In the end, he himself found it unlikely that he would be able to liquefy his mana into a mana drop, but it was a goal he set himself and he wanted to achieve it. Even if it was not likely that he would achieve that, there was something else he was confident in achieving. He definitely wanted to reach the combat prowess of a low lick state, which was equivalent to a human Magus. With his newly acquired body refining manual, his high soul world core amplification he received from his soul bonds that had yet to mature, high mana aptitude, and comprehension ability, Jason was sure to reach at least a high combat prowess during the next year. If his estimation was not completely off, Scorpio would completely mature during the next year, reaching the magical beast rank, while Artemis should also reach the magical rank, even if Jason was unsure if this was already her matured state. Meanwhile, his Black Origin Flame would most likely reach the required amount of soul energy units, allowing it to evolve into a Tier 1 Origin Flame. This would also give Jason the chance for his second baptism, further cleansing his body from impurities, while at the same time strengthening his mana veins, physique, and enlarge his mana core. There were more than enough factors playing into his hands, and Jason wanted to accept and digest everything greedily in order to become strong enough to cope up with the foreign races or particularly nasty and disgusting humans. Even if it was not enough for Jason to reach the low lick or Magus state, it was a good starting point, allowing him to be one of the strongest amongst his peers, if there was even a human at the age of 15 or 16, who was capable of achieving the same feat. However, in order to attain this feat, he had to leave Asterix Island as soon as possible, and it was already fortunate that the Big 3 tournament had only 3,000 participants for each year. As such, it would take 1 month in the worst-case scenario, which Jason wanted to use to increase his physique, mana core size, and soul energy to a certain degree, without attracting too much suspicion. In the end, he was still unsure if he should use the Messenger Crystal in order to figure out if he should win the Big 3 tournament if possible, or if holding back and reaching a lower rank to make it seem as if he was weaker. But this was something Jason would think of later, because it was already New Year's Eve, and thinking too much about possible schemings old Drake prepared would only depress him, which was definitely nothing that should be. After the Flays calmed down slightly, they continued to talk about all kinds of things, before they switched to playing board games, which seemed to be a tradition in the Flay family. Never having played something like this, Jason felt that some board games required extremely high strategic thinking, while others heavily relied on luck, which was not something he adored. New Year's Eve passed quietly, without another incident, and they celebrated it joyously, while the same applied for many families, all over Canir and the archipelago. Chapter 253 Ingredients by Hydesgrain. 3 days passed since New Year's Eve when Greg was notified that the last ingredients required to concoct his Soulbond's evolution solution arrived, which caused the Flays to be overjoyed while Jason rubbed his hands in both excitement and nervosity at the same time. Throughout the last 3 days, he prolonged his practice with all kinds of extremely difficult grade 1 potions and didn't fail a single time, while his purification process increased in proficiency thanks to him being able to handle his flame much more precisely than before. This was also thanks to the Netherworld's fort body refining technique he practiced, but mostly because his bond with the Black Origin flame thickened, while it seemed at the same time that his Origin flame received an amplification in its intelligence, which was weird to notice. If it was comparable with a restless newborn, it was now rather quiet and curious at everything around it. With his current proficiency he attained thanks to his seemingly perfect vision, Black Origin flame, and sensitivity towards mana, Jason was sure that he would be able to concoct the Bloodline Unsealing Potion without any problems, even if he wouldn't dare to cleanse the ingredients from impurities in order to avoid even the slightest issue. In the end, it was Greg's ingredients and not his, even though he lent him the funds. As such he had to be rather careful, and even more so because they were expensive and rare. It would take a few weeks in order for a new batch of the required ingredients to arrive if he were to make a mistake, which was not something Jason could afford with his limited time. Even so, he was confident in himself, and now, he just had to figure out where exactly he should concoct the potion. Concocting the potion at the Flays wouldn't be extremely smart, because they would see him, and get to know that he was able to concoct a bloodline unsealing solution, was not something Jason wanted. Even if he trusted them completely, there was no way for him to reassure their safety, if he were to tell them everything he figured out, because it was still possible that they accidentally revealed something, after they parted ways. Thinking that they might end up in a perilous situation with a simple slip of their tongue, Jason didn't want to force his own burden on them, which caused him to think of a different place to concoct the bloodline unsealing solution. There is only the Artisan Tower, right? Thinking about the possibilities, Jason couldn't help but feel weird, because the Artisan Tower seemed to have almost monopolized the whole market for all basic lifestyle occupations on Asterix, with a few exceptional individuals as exceptions. Nodding his head, Jason decided to go to the Artisan Tower as soon as the ingredients arrived, and there was nothing else to think about, because it was not even something special for youths to experiment with the lifestyle occupations in a basic concoction, forging or inscribing room. As such, he wouldn't attract too much attention if he were to ask for a basic room, as long as he was allowed to rent one, which was probably not that much of a problem, as he knew Cheng, while a basic concoction room was not even considered special, to begin with. If he didn't want to drag the Flays into his problems, he would rather stay at their house without wasting more than 2 hours solely for the traveling purpose. In the end, Jason told himself that he could as well read something or practice the Heaven's Hell technique within the shuttle, which caused him to not think too much about this insignificant issue, if one could even call it that. The whole morning passed without anything special happening, while the Flays strolled around restlessly without being able to calm down. It looked like they couldn't even practice a martial art technique or absorb mana from the outside, because they were so nervous, while Jason could only look at the four weirdly. They also asked him multiple times if it was really fine with his teacher to immediately concoct the bloodline unsealing solution, to which he only nodded his head, without answering, as he already did so several dozen times. With Artemis and Scorpio outside the Soul World during the whole day, Jason leaned on Scorpio's body, in the backyard when he read all kinds of books, with Artemis laying on top of Scorpio once she was tired from flying through the sky. When Greg received a notification, everyone except Jason and his 2 Soulbonds jumped up, with radiant smiles on their faces as they rushed towards the street, where they could see a small drone carefully descending with a heavy package below it. Accepting the package, Jason noticed that the parcel itself was nothing special, while the small boxes radiated a cooling sensation, telling everyone that there were multiple perennial boxes within. Without wasting any time, Greg picked up the parcel and carefully approached Jason, only to hesitate for a second, because doubts filled his mind. Everything will be fine, right? Why am I suddenly so nervous? Taurus will finally completely unseal his bloodline and will evolve into a lesser Minotaur. Reassuring himself, he held out the parcel towards Jason, who stood up in order to store the parcel, as he noticed Greg's hesitation. Smiling, he confidently said, "Don't worry. At the end of the day, you'll have the bloodline unsealing solution in your own hands." Hearing this, Greg's tension slightly eased up, as Jason wanted to store the ingredients into his storage device. Noticing that it didn't work, he averted his attention from Greg to the parcel, only to see strong mana fluctuations coming from the ingredients, telling him that they were plucked only several days ago, without hurting their roots, which was extremely beneficial because it preserved their effect. Smiling lightly, he took out a bag, where he put in the several perennial boxes, before he gazed at the other materials within, nodding his head, as he stored them within the storage device of his quantum bracelet. Looking at Greg and the flays, he said, "I'll be going now." "Be careful," everyone said, causing him to frown lightly, because one could put it into two different ways, with either him being careful to not injure himself or that he should be careful in order to prevent damaging the ingredients. While sitting inside the shuttle, Jason thought about many things, and one of them was, if Taurus, Greg's reinforced Horned Bull Soulbond, would be able to finish its evolution before the Big 3 tournament started, which was only 2 days away. However, in the end, it was unlikely, because the evolution alone would most likely take longer than 24 hours, considering that Taurus evolution would take as long as Scorpio's, even if that was hardly possible. One beast was barely at the awakened rank, while the other was a mid-evolved ranked beast, to begin with. As such, it might be possible for Greg to enter the tournament, while he had to adjust to the newly gained strength, which would most likely increase over the duration of the whole tournament, even if Jason couldn't be sure of this. Once the shuttle arrived, Jason couldn't help but feel his heartbeat increasing, as he went through the security check, that eyed him weirdly, as they scanned his bag, only to perceive a cooling sensation from the multiple boxes within, while the scan told them that high-grade herbs and plants were inside. Ignoring the gazes, he continued to approach the reception in order to rent an alchemy room, when he saw the same receptionist as always. She also noticed him and immediately adjusted her demeanor and politely inquired if she should request a high blacksmith room, because she remembered the same request last time Jason arrived. However, hearing that Jason wanted to rent a basic alchemy room, she couldn't help but eye him with doubt, as she nodded her head in order to follow the common procedures. Once everything was finished, he received the number for his alchemy room, as he walked to the elevator with high expectations. Chapter 254, Bloodline Unsealing Potion by Hydesgrain. It was only lunchtime when Jason finally entered the alchemy he rented, and looking at the whole room, he couldn't help but sigh deeply. The tools only released a minuscule amount of mana, while the room itself felt as if it was constructed with mana-drained materials, causing him to lament lightly. However, there was more than enough space for him to take out his own tools and equipment, which radiated dense mana, as they were made out of high-quality ingredients that passively supported and amplified the whole concocting process. It was only a small support, but it was definitely better than nothing, which was the case with the tools within the basic alchemy room. Placing the perennial boxes next to each other on the table in front of him, with the other ingredients behind, Jason sorted everything in the correct order, which would make the whole brewing process much easier. He didn't even have to open up the perennial boxes because he could see the herbs' outlines thanks to his eyes, allowing them to remain their high quality until the very last moment. There were not many herbs and ingredients required, with pure neutral magic crystal shards being the cheapest out of them. Meanwhile, the most expensive ingredient, which was also the most important and main ingredient, was the Crimson Nebulous Zangha, even if it was only a baby fist-sized plant. It released a dense blood hue, and Jason couldn't help but admire such a plant because it could generate such a thick blood hue, which was something he never saw before. Taking a few deep breaths, he placed multiple test tubes in front of him, with 2 beaks and a beaker next to them. In front of him were 2 tripods with a small hole in the center, and igniting a flame in each hand, he ordered his Black Origin flame to let them slowly float below the tripod before they adjusted their temperature. Controlling the temperature, Jason was more than happy to have the black origin flame because maintaining the temperature of two flames at the same time was not as difficult as before, and he didn't even want to imagine how frustrating it would be with normal flames. Taking out one of his Viridi Starstream daggers, he cleansed it with his mana in order to prevent anything unwanted to obstruct the final result. Placing the dagger not even half a meter away from him, Jason focuses on the ingredients next to him, as he took out the third tripod from his spatial ring, which he placed to his left. With the beaker placed on top of it, he filled it with water and he manifested a third flame at a low temperature, which he placed below the third tripod. Heating up the water, he took out the mana crystal shards and put them into the water, before he threw in several dozen grams of glaw sand into the warmed-up water, causing a reaction between the grade 2 sand and the mana crystal shards. Slowly increasing the temperature of the third flame, Jason averted his attention in order to place a test tube within the two remaining tripods, before filling them with water and luo sand in addition to fewer neutral crystal shards, before he added fire elemental crystal shards into the left test tube and ice elemental crystal shards. Seeing that it began to react with the luo sand, Jason perceived that the water released faint transmuted mana fluctuations, which was exactly what he wanted. Sieving out the reduced luo sand without any mana fluctuations left and the mana-drained crystal shards, he obtained two colored flask tubes, one radiating a faint heat with a faint crimson color, while the other radiated a faint cold, while its color slowly changed into a faint blue. The flame below the faintly blue test tube was extremely low, barely heating up the cold, creating a repulsive reaction, as he immediately took out the perennial box with the Ice Affinity, Arctic Glacier Orchid. Tearing out the petals, which were the cause for the orchid's ice affinity, he carefully placed them into the test tube, before he increased the heat for 3 seconds to an extremely high temperature, before he completely extinguished the flame. Seeing the orchid petals brightening up, Jason knew that he didn't make a mistake, as it was the natural reaction of the Arctic Glacier Orchid to release cold, cooling, and high nutrition mana upon being attacked by sun rays or high temperature. Noticing this, Jason couldn't help but smile, as he averted his attention back to the beaker, whose content reacted already with each other. Sieving out the mana-drained crystal shards and glaw sand, one could feel a dense mana flow within the mana-infused water. Taking out the Crimson Nebulous Zangha, Jason noticed that the whole plant seemed alive, which caused him to sigh deeply, as he pierced straight into its center with the dagger that laid next to him only a moment ago, killing the semi-sentient plant, without trying to subdue it, which would bring much more benefits to the whole evolution solution he concocted. However, without any prior practice, Jason couldn't waste any time by experimenting with how to subdue a semi-sentient plant, which was the reason for him to take out and cleanse his dagger. With the dead Crimson Nebulous Zangha inside the beaker, Jason increased the heat of the third flame consistently, adjusting it to the high temperature required to drain all nutrition and even the bloody hue out of the plant, forcefully causing a reaction with the thick mana-infused water. When the third flame reached the required temperature and he noticed that it maintained the heat, without fluctuating, Jason couldn't help but wipe away the sweat pearls forming on his forehead. Averting his attention to the two test tubes, Jason took out a fire-attributed ingredient called Blazing Ocean Lotus, which he cut into several dozen small pieces before throwing it into the red test tube. Seeing it reacting, Jason couldn't help but avert his gaze towards the cold test tube whose ice-transmuted mana-infused water thickened, as his attention reverted back to the Crimson Nebulous Zangha. It seemed as if everything worked fine and the ingredients he used didn't really try to fight against their fate, as Dahlia told him that it was possible. Now he only had to wait for the main component and two subcomponents to finish transmuting, training the nutrition, mana, and medical effect out of the herbs. However, that was still not everything, as Jason took out a fourth tripod, which he ignited with another flame, increasing the number of flames he had to control to 3 again, as the ice-transmuted test tube didn't require any heat. Filling one beak with water, luo sand, and mana crystal shards, they reacted with each other once again, before he sieved everything. Taking out multiple herbs out of the remaining perennial boxes, Jason carefully put them into the beak. Seeing first reactions, his timing had to be almost perfect, and waiting patiently, he put in the next herb, before the reactions caused by the two herbs within started to release an aromatic smell, telling him that he had to put in the remaining herbs at once. Glancing at the time, the two test tubes and the beaker, Jason knew that it was almost time, as he sieved the drained herbs out of the two test tubes, before he placed the last beak, where the red test tube was situated on. With the black origin flame below heating up the glass, he averted his attention to sieve the drained herbs out of the two test tubes, before he carefully filled the content of both, revolting transmuted mana-infused water sources, into the beak. Hearing a small puff with red-bluish smoke raising up, Jason sighed once again, before he waited a moment in order to see the reactions. Noticing that everything was fine, he averted his attention to the small beak he filled with several herbs, as he sieved the mana-drained herbs out. Now there was only the Crimson Nebulous Zangha left, and Jason noticed that it was almost completely drained, as he took it out because the thick blood aura released by the dense mana-infused water was more than enough for his purpose. Sieving the Crimson Nebulous Zangha out and laying it aside, he put in the content of the thick solution created from the several herbs into the large beaker, before swirling it around carefully. Seeing the wanted reaction of the two different solutions reacting with each other, an aromatic scent filled with a thick bloody touch could be smelled. Averting his attention once again, he had only two different solutions left, and now, he had to be careful with putting the fiery ice solution in the Crimson Nebulous Zangha bloodline solution. With his mana eyes utilized to the limit, Jason observed every little reaction, which caused him to hasten and slow down the whole mixing process. Finally, more than 15 minutes later, it was done, and Jason's legs almost gave in, because it was more difficult than he imagined before, even if the worst-case scenario with complete sentient herbs trying to revolt didn't happen, which caused him to sigh in relief. In the end, the whole evolution solution remained carefully put into 2 vials, which Jason immediately stored away in order to stay safe, as he looked at the chaos he created. The whole alchemy room looked like it was a pigsty to beg with, and Dahlia would most likely lecture him for hours that such a mess was not acceptable. However, Jason couldn't care less at the moment, because he created his first evolution solution, even if it was barely one of the easiest without him intentionally purifying it a tiny bit. Nevertheless, because of his origin flame's innate ability, all ingredients had been refined and purified to a marginal degree, even if it didn't change anything at the radiating color, because there was none to start with. This was the sole point he was dissatisfied with, because he wanted to purify everything, but the overwhelming emotions that overcame him by creating an evolutionary solution turned everything less important, which even Artemis and Scorpio, who remained in his soul world, overjoyed. Chapter 255 Unsealed Bloodline. By Hydesgrain. Cleaning up the mess he created, Jason couldn't wait to rush to the Flays, who were probably also waiting for his arrival impatiently. He was also expecting how exactly the reinforced horned bull would change, after digesting the evolution solution, in addition to a large supply of mana stones. Thinking about this, Jason halted in his tracks for a moment, as he suddenly asked himself, have the Flays even purchased enough mana stones? Shaking his head, he doubted that the Flays disregarded the importance mana stones had towards a beast's evolution and even bloodline unsealing. In the end, with a high mana supply, the reinforced horned bull might even directly metamorph without the need to evolve over a longer period like it was the case with Artemis. It would be much better for Greg if his soul bond evolved like Scorpio, which was more likely, due to the fact that both used evolution solutions, while Artemis had to process everything by herself, without any support backing her. As such, Jason rushed out of the Artisan Tower once again, leaving the cleaned basic alchemy room. Inside the shuttle, he gazed out of the window, only to see that the sun already disappeared, to which he could only sigh. The lifestyle occupations are all too time-consuming. It was not that Jason didn't want to learn all 4 lifestyle occupations his masters could teach, but his time was limited, and if he wanted to make his goal about reaching the League state before the end of the new year, there was no time to practice all of them at once. Even if a single day was 48 hours long, Jason would rather focus on other aspects than practice 4 lifestyle occupations at once. Thinking about it, he thought that learning 2 lifestyle occupations to a higher degree and the others at a lower proficiency would already be the limit when he remembered the basis practice as a blacksmith, which he had yet to continue. Within the shuttle, Jason had more than enough time to think about everything that was about to happen soon, as the Big 3 tournament would start 2 days later. Still pondering how much he should reveal about himself, he concluded that his fortified soul conjunctions would attract everyone's attention, because it was even uncommon to see something like that from someone at the age of 30, even less from young men and women in their 20s. Explaining how he achieved a fortified soul conjunction, barely 7 months after his soul awakening, was not possible, because Jason was also not sure how he achieved such a terrifying feat in such a short period. Nevertheless, it happened, and Jason was the last who would complain about something that benefited him. As such, there was nothing bad about it, while hiding the fact of his fortified soul conjunction wouldn't be much of a problem. Meanwhile, his physical strength compared to the average expert stage was extremely high, as it already reached the 3rd expert rank, even though it only barely crossed it. As such, Jason could fight against an average 3rd expert rank just with his physique, which was terrifying enough, and he wondered if this would happen to be the case in the first-year Big 3 tournaments. At least it was not highly likely, without adding the amplification of Asterix's most prodigious soul awakenings. With their soul bonds share, enhancing their mana core size and physique, Jason was extremely sure that quite a few students would be able to reach the same strength he currently possessed. This excluded, however, the fact that he was barely a 6th adept rank with 3 soul bonds at that. Arriving at the Flays, Jason immediately jumped out of the shuttle, after paying, only to rush towards the house, without halting his step to bother about taking his shoes off, as his excitement ignited. He already knew how an evolution would be like, but he couldn't really focus on the whole process, because he shared Scorpio's pain at the same time, preventing him from noticing minute details that he wanted to note down now. Inside the house, however, Jason couldn't see any of the Flays, which puzzled him, as he looked around with his mana eyes fully utilized, only to see all 4 mana cores with their mana fluctuating restless, which caused him to go outside, where he was almost immediately surrounded and heartily greeted by the others. Noticing this, Jason smiled weirdly, as he took out the 2 bloodline unsealing solutions, which he placed in Greg's trembling hands, who was barely able to control his mixed emotions of excitement and anxiety. Taking a glance behind Greg, he noticed that the Flays purchased a one-time mana isolation parchment, with a mountain of grade 2 mana stones next surrounding it. Scanning through the mana stones, Jason wondered if this was really enough, and estimating everything, he concluded that it might be enough to unseal the bloodline with some extra. Jason doubted that the extra would be enough to forcefully metamorphose the 4-legged bull into a bipedal lesser minotaur, which caused him to show a slightly worried expression, and Malia noticed this. She was still skinny, but she looked much healthier compared to her haggard look when they left the 4-star rift. Staring at Jason, she asked, unsure what he was worried about. "What's wrong, Jason? Is there a problem with the evolution potion or something else we forgot?" Nobody of the Flays ever evolved one of their soul bonds, while their knowledge about beast creators and the requirements for an evolution was shallow, to put it simply. As such, Jason, whose soul bonds already underwent an evolution, while he was a beast creator's disciple to add on, was much more knowledgeable in this field as each of them. His age didn't matter to any of them at this point, as Jason noticed everyone's expression, filled with worry and hope at the same time. Clearing his throat, he explained, "There is nothing wrong with the evolution solution, and the mana isolation magic circle seems fine. However, I'm not sure if Taurus will be able to metamorphose with the supplied mana stones. There might be too few of them to achieve that. Nevertheless, it's definitely enough to unseal his bloodline completely, even if the rest has to be adjusted over time. In the end, that's only my guess." Hearing this, Mark and Gabriella looked at each other, before they sighed in relief, as they emptied their whole stored grade 3 mana stones into the mana stones mountain, with Malia and Greg following their parents' steps. Perceiving the sheer amount of mana in front of him, Jason estimated that it should be more than enough, as he nodded his head towards Greg. Everyone except Greg stepped back, leaving him some space, as he summoned Taurus next to him, who roughly understood what was about to happen. Activating the one-time isolation magic circle on the parchment, a bright white light emerged, creating a dome with a radius of roughly 20 meters in diameter, as Taurus approached the parchment, halting its tracks above. Everyone noticed Greg's shaking hand, as he opened the first vial with the evolution solution, before he approached his soul bond. His trembling hand worsened, as he fed the vial to Taurus, who sensed that the content within the vials benefited it a lot. Greedily gulping down the first potion, it started pouring with his hooves, indicating Greg to calm down and give it the content of the remaining vial calmly. After Taurus gulped down the content of the last evolution solution, Greg immediately left the dome, only to see Taurus roaring out, as it loosened the threads of all mana stones around it at once, which caused them to solve at once. With the mana stones dissolving, gaseous and liquefied mana was released, creating thick fog, which enveloped the reinforced horned bull, whose skin began to turn red. The veins below Taurus' skin began to bulge, protruding out of the thick bull hide, as its eyes turned completely red, without any white left. Greg felt suddenly scared, as his eyes turned similarly red, as he roared out, causing the flays to approach him worriedly. Looking at Greg, Jason, who was the most familiar with his friend's berserk ability, noticed that he entered the same state. Thinking for a moment, it looked like Greg was about to go on a rampage, only to be held back by his father, as Jason approached his friend. Using brute force, he knocked his friend out with a single punch, only to be eyed weirdly by his family. Shrugging his shoulders, Jason calmly said, "It's better this way. He won't even feel his soul bond's pain and we can simply observe everything without the need to look after Greg in the berserk state." Noticing how Jason reacted felt weird to the Flays because they thought that the two youths were best friends, only to see Jason knocking out their son without any hesitation. Gabriella was the most shocked because she never saw Jason using violence like this, which was incomparable to the time the two youths sparred with each other. Looking at him with widened eyes, Jason felt similarly weird, because he never thought that Greg would be forced to enter the berserk state while his soul bond evolved, even less that he had to knock Greg out. Shaking his head, Jason decided to focus on the reinforced horned bull's evolution, which was already completely enveloped by the thick mana fog. Only the bright gleaming red color could be faintly perceived through the fog, radiating a perilous aura, causing Jason to look even more intense at the whole process. Hours passed and the sun rose, when Greg finally woke up, only to see that his soul bond was still evolving, even if he already felt a devastating difference inside him, causing him to mumble in disbelief. Taurus' bloodline is already completely unsealed. He reached the low unblemished rank and it's still not done. Chapter 256 Last Chance. By Hydesgrain. The magic circle was still shining brightly, while the mana within was almost completely absorbed by Taurus, whose bloodline was now completely unleashed. Its skin changed into a red color while its muscles thickened, almost bursting out. Over the last few hours, Jason and the rest observed the process, only for him to stop in between to practice his Heaven's Hell technique once it was clear that nothing bad should happen if he were to avert his attention for some time. Even if it was not excessively important for him to practice the Heaven's Hell technique as arduous as he did before, it would benefit him later, which was what he wanted. As such, he didn't skip a single day, even though he was forced to reduce the number of times he could practice because it took him over 2 hours to practice the Heaven's Hell technique now. This was after his proficiency increase, which decreased the required time already, and solely thanks to his soul energy that increased to more than 2,000 units, which caused the whole construction of a drill made out of multiple threads and the following procedure to take much longer. If he were to practice the Heaven's Hell technique 3 times a day, it would take more than 6 hours, which was currently too long. However, now that he finished Taurus' bloodline solution, he could finally decrease his alchemy practice a little bit, allowing him to practice his other martial art techniques and proficiencies for a longer period. While Greg was knocked out, he suddenly began to groan out in pain, telling Jason that the real process of the metamorphosis started, as Greg received an overall boost in his physique, which was higher compared to what others would receive as his friend possessed a physically attributed soul world. Averting his gaze, to look at Taurus, Jason perceived that it was slowly transforming from a four-legged beast to a bipedal beast, which was a substantial change, considering that the bull never walked on two legs. Seeing this, he smiled and thought that it was definitely a good decision to add more mana stones in order to supply the metamorphosis. It was already lunchtime when Jason received a notification on his quantum bracelet. Jason reduced his contact to anyone else except the Flays drastically, because he had too many things to do and didn't even think of messaging anyone else, while the same most likely applied to Seren, who sent him a message. "Hey Jason. Didn't you want to enter the Big 3 tournament? I know that you're busy absorbing mana and so on, but are you not aware that today is the last chance for you to enter the special combat class seat? Or have you forgotten that your leave of absence took away your special combat class seat? Either way, come to school if you want to enter the Big 3 tournament." Reading the message, Jason involuntarily slapped his own forehead, as a quiet, FCK, slipped out of his mouth, causing Mark to look at him weirdly. Standing up, he told Mark that he had to go to school before he took another glance at the evolving bull. Everything seemed fine and there was no need for him to observe everything anymore. As such, he ordered a shuttle and waited for some time, before it arrived in order to bring him straight to school. Meanwhile, he chatted a little bit with Seren about all kinds of things that happened in the meantime, until he finally saw the school gates, and rushing into the small coliseum, the first thing he did was to search for Seren, before he scanned through the mana cores of all present special combat class seats. From their mana core rank, Jason immediately figured out that his opponents would be at the 9th Adept rank, while several 8th Adept ranks who received stronger amplifications from their Soul World core and soul bonds were also present. There were also several 1st Expert ranks, but only one 2nd Expert rank, and that was Bella. However, in the end, the average strength he perceived after adding their soul bonds amplification was roughly a mana core size at the 2nd Expert stage. Estimating their physical strength to be roughly on par with that rank, Jason couldn't help but smile, as he already achieved a higher physique, while he was also further refined his physique. Furthermore, his physique gave him an additional boost for his fire affinity in his circulation pace, mana outburst, and sensitivity, which allowed his Black Origin flame to act even more accurately. This was also the reason for his confidence when he concocted the Bloodline Unsealing solution, as his flame's temperature was one of the most important factors. Finally, after roughly 5 minutes, he found Seren, who was talking to Milo. Waving him, they also noticed him, and with his mana eyes fully utilized, he noticed that Milo broke into the 1st Expert rank, while his amplification allowed him to barely reach the 2nd Expert rank in his mana core's size. Meanwhile, Seren's mana core seemed to have reached the 7th Adept rank, almost at the 8th rank, according to his perception, while the amplification from his mutated mana slime increased his mana core size to the 9th Adept rank. Even if Seren's martial art techniques were extremely powerful with his high proficiency, it surprised Jason that he could maintain his special combat class seat, as he was the weakest amongst all, if one were to consider only the mana core rank and physical strength. However, after adding Seren's unique soul bond, his situation changed slightly because he had much more mana than anyone else and could erupt with more mana and over a long duration at that, which was not the case with his opponents. Nevertheless, there was a limit on how many times he could use his smile ability, mana injection, and if he were to be challenged a few times in succession with a short break in between the fights, his friend's situation would still look bad. As such, Jason could only praise his friend inwardly, as they talked to each other a little bit. Apparently, Milo and Seren became friends over the month he was not present, which Jason found extremely good because Seren didn't have any other friend than him on Asterix. When he remained at the Flays for over a month, without messaging Seren at all, Jason felt somewhat guilty, even though he didn't do anything wrong, but fortunately enough, Milo became Seren's friend. Greeting each other, they talked with each other for roughly half an hour, before Jason prepared himself to take on a special combat class seat. There were all types of affinities Jason perceived, and he wanted to fight all of them in order to find out more about the individual combat style they created, which either boosted their weaponry with an affinity or even completely relied on their affinity. Nevertheless, thinking about it, this thought was stupid, because his curiosity mostly relied on the fight he saw from the foreign races. They fought with high-quality affinities, while either relying on them or adjusting them to their combat style, and it was only obvious that the difference between the foreign races at the Prisma stage and humans at the Mortal stage was completely different. In the end, Jason walked to one of the students that had a mana core at the first expert rank and a fire affinity, that was most likely at the lower evolved rank. The youth's mana core size was only amplified by a small margin, which was not even worth mentioning in his opinion, and Jason challenged him, before walking straight towards the combat arena, noticeably bored. Seeing this, the youth Jason challenged was frustrated and slightly angered, which caused him to rush after him. Once the AI initiated the fight, a short sword appeared in the youth's hand, which he immediately enveloped with a thick mana membrane before igniting it in flames. With a burning sword, he rushed at Jason, who looked at him unbothered, without moving a single inch, as he lifted his hand. As if Jason himself burned, a faint red flickering hue enveloped him, as a dozen black fireballs manifested around him, and the youth that charged at him to hesitate for a moment, as he perceived the searing heat that radiated from Jason. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself to continue charging, as Jason shot the fireballs one after another towards the youth, who could barely evade a few of them in succession before his arm was streaked by the last fireball, burning his hair and skin until it finally flew past him. Enduring the pain, spreading through his whole body, the youth thought that Jason was done for good, as he noticed that another dozen fireballs of the same caliber had been manifested around the golden-eyed youth in front of him. Holy sh**t. Crying out in shock, Jason could only smile apologetic, as he fired a few fireballs, before extinguishing the remaining, only for him to unsheath his Viridi Starstream daggers in order to finish his opponent for good. Less than a minute passed before the AI announced the winner, and Jason stepped back, only to see the youth holding back his tears, as he stared at him in anger. What a weakling, Jason thought, thinking that the slight burn wouldn't even kill him because he didn't even fully utilize his fire affinity, and comparing the pain to his broken shoulder and other multiple occasions where he had to endure unbearable pain, he couldn't help but think that the youth in front of him was nothing but a weakling. Suddenly, he noticed a familiar voice behind him, with the youth in front of him being enveloped by a faint, milky-hued aura, healing his injuries. Jason, you're late. Couldn't you have been a little bit more considerate to your poor fellow student? Turning around, Jason saw Till, and he smiled lightly to greet his teacher with a short, yet polite, "Hello, Mr. Gryle." Noticing this, Till frowned lightly, but shaking his head, it was most likely better for them to behave like normal teacher and students in school, as he said, "You finally decided to come and reclaim your seat to attend the Big 3 tournament tomorrow. Is that your final choice?" Hearing what his teacher said, Jason immediately knew what he meant, as he nodded his head with determination flickering in his eyes. Chapter 257 Earth Dragon by Hydesgrain. Claiming a seat for the Big 3 tournament, which would start already the day after, Jason was satisfied with his achievement, even though he might have acted a little bit harsh. For his opponent to maintain his seat with a low evolved fire affinity and only a first expert mana core rank until now, he should have been proficient with his martial art technique. However, it seemed like Jason's onslaught of black, peak evolved fireballs might have been too much, as he manifested 24 of them within a few seconds, without a large interval between. If an average person were to do this, they would most likely require more time to circulate the mana inside their body to manifest fireballs around them, while the whole process altogether would also take slightly longer. As such, even Seren, who was already aware of his friend's high proficiency with his affinities, was slightly taken aback because he couldn't have imagined that Jason would be able to increase his accuracy to shoot the fireballs exactly at the same spot, while trying to maintain a dozen fireballs without any signs of instability. There weren't many students, challenging each other as it was the last day, as such a few noticed Jason's fight against the fire ability user, only to overwhelm him by simply shooting 24 fireballs in succession at the poor first expert rank, who could only lament having met Jason. His clothes were burned, showing his burned skin below, and the youth had to suppress his tears, while Jason didn't give him more attention than required. Without knowing the capabilities of his opponent, Jason's opponent charged at him, not caring that he remained extremely calm, even though his mana core was only at the 6th adept rank. This alone should have been enough to tell the first expert rank to remain level-headed without mindlessly charging at him, taking Jason as a pushover. Today's fight would most likely be a good lesson for the youth, and it would have been a waste of time for him to enter the Big 3 tournament if he were to act similarly reckless there. Thinking about the Big 3 tournament, Jason felt excited, even if old Drake forcefully plummeted this excitement, because it was unsure what exactly he planned. A month ago, when old Drake told Till to take him to the Mana Dome Tower, where they met the Drake family patriarch, Jason and old Drake didn't talk to each other, because there was simply no reason for either of them. But this caused Jason to feel even more insecure about his current position because Shane was injured, and it wouldn't be considered unlikely for old Drake to scheme something in the shadows, as he already tried to draw the patriarch's attention to him before. As such, Jason could only sigh deeply, thinking that it was time for him to call Shane and Dahlia once again to figure out what exactly his masters could do at the moment, and what exactly he was supposed to do. In the end, this was the best solution, because communicating with each other could solve many issues, with his masters raking their brains to secure his safety. Jason didn't like relying on his masters, but apparently, there didn't seem to be another way, other than fleeing out of the Drake family's clutches while hiding somewhere until he was strong enough, which would take years, without being able to act freely as his current circumstances were not favorable. While the special combat class continued, there were only a few students left, and in the end there was nothing special that happened anymore. Seren also told him that the beast he wanted as Soulbond would soon lay its egg, after several dozen years, which caused Jason to wonder what kind of beast his friend would contract. However, even after asking, Seren only showed him a knowing smile, as he said, "You'll see soon enough," as Jason offered to help his friend to pick a good beast, due to his mana eyes. "As you know, I can see mana fluctuations, and if there are several offsprings it might be possible for me to tell you which of them is the best to form a Soulbond contract with, even if I cannot promise anything." Knowing that what he said was the truth, even if the reason was different, Jason made a one-time offer to Seren because he helped him a lot to improve his martial art techniques, and even gifted him the weightless steps movement technique, which he utilized a lot. As such, he wanted to thank Seren properly, who looked at him, pondering, as Till, who stood close to them, said, "You can come with us, and it's not really dangerous, maybe a little bit intimidating, but Seren will only benefit from it, right?" Till knew that Jason's potential was limitless, and after figuring out that the golden-eyed youth contracted not only Artemis, a beast labeled as trash, a miniature Parascores, and even a mutated Black Flame, while maintaining an extraordinary high combat prowess which seemed to become better with each day passing, Till couldn't help but feel happy when Jason told Seren that he could help him to figure out which Soulbond he should choose. This, however, meant that there were multiple offspring, which was extremely rare, as the beast Seren wanted to bind had an extremely low fertility rate, even among its rank. After Till said so, Seren only nodded his head, as a vibrant smile emerged on his face, which caused Jason to smile weirdly. "Now that the master allowed you to come with me, I can tell you what kind of beast I'll contract. It's an earth dragon. Isn't that cool?" Hearing this, Jason's smile stiffened for a moment before he blinked several times without saying anything for a moment. "An earth dragon?" he asked to reassure what Seren said, and seeing him nodding his head vigorously, Jason couldn't help but sigh. Aren't earth dragons extremely extinct on Canir and even rare to find in permanent rifts all around our territory? Even though they are only at the peak Guardian rank, their affinity is on an entirely different league, compared to others on their rank. Wait. Do you want to tell me that you have enough soul energy units to bind a Guardian ranked beast? A peak Guardian ranked dragon at that. Perceiving what exactly Seren told him right now, he could barely hold himself together. While a magical ranked beast already required between 2,000 to 10,000 soul energy units, a Guardian ranked beast required 10,000 to 100,000 soul energy units, which was not something a 14-year-old youth should be able to bind, until the age of 17 or 18, considering that Seren's soul energy was high since his soul awakening. However, hearing Seren's words, he couldn't help but feel weird. Normally one would accumulate soul energy units for years in order to reach something Seren achieved in 7 or so months. Looking at his friend in shock, Seren already figured out what exactly his friend wanted to tell him, as Till behind him intercepted the discussion. Jason, you don't have to be so shocked. Even though Seren's soul energy was high since his soul awakening, because he hails from a big family, he was allowed to awake his soul a few months prior to you, even more so, because Seren had to tend his malfunction. In the end, the Earth Dragon Wheel pickup will still remain in its egg for several months up to 1 year, maybe even 2 in order to grow healthy, if Seren contracts it before it grows up in its shell. As such, his soul energy can slowly be adjusted, staring daggers at his teacher, because he was not even allowed to speak for himself, Seren told Jason. When I awoke my soul roughly 9 months ago, I had roughly 1,000 soul energy units, which is already extremely high, and even without practicing the Heaven's Hell technique, I could have contracted a mid-unblemished beast, or a magical ranked beast in its juvenile stage while practicing the Heaven's Hell technique. However, I had to bind a mutated mana slime, because it was necessary to tend my malfunctioned mana veins, which allowed me slowly accumulated more soul energy in order to prepare for a powerful second soul bond. Currently, my soul energy is at 20,000 units, and each practice with the Heaven's Hell technique takes up to 6 hours, if not longer. Unfortunately, I can't neglect my other practice, otherwise, I would practice the Heaven's Hell technique every day. Nevertheless, with my current soul energy units and the long period an Earth Dragon requires to hatch even after I bind it, I should be able to reach its requirements. Hearing this, Jason couldn't help but feel astonished, as he wondered why his friend took up such a difficult path in order to contract an Earth Dragon, which would take even more soul energy units than a normal beast because it was labeled a mythical beast, with terrifying strength, before it even hatched. Thinking about the reason, he finally remembered that the situation was similar to his and Artemis because his soul bond with her had been extremely thick since the beginning. Remembering this, Seren probably planned to act as if he was his future second soul bond's mother or something similar to that in order to establish a thicker bond. His eyes widened and Jason could only praise Seren's decision inwardly. Even if there would be many obstacles, the benefits would still overweight the effort. The two of them continued to talk to each other about all kinds of other topics, once Jason digested the news about Seren's second soulbond's choice and the special combat class ended, without anyone else challenging the two of them as they went home. Milo, who talked to Seren earlier, was occupied with Bella, who nagged him for spending too much time with Seren, which caused him to excuse himself shortly after Jason arrived. Apparently, they were a couple, which was somewhat entertaining for Jason, who thought that they suited each other. All of them were excited about the tournament that would start the next day, and Jason's worry about old Drake seemed to have vanished, as he entered the shuttle he ordered before. Chapter 258 Test of Strength by Hydesgrain. Jason started to read the advanced Beastarium inside the shuttle, and he couldn't help but think about Seren's second soulbond choice as he began to wonder what kind of beast he would contract next to increase his combat prowess in the most efficient way. There were many abilities and affinities he was interested in, and a soulbond that could heal him was one of the best he could take, while a soulbond that could initiate a crowd control ability wouldn't be bad either. But after pondering for a while, there were also other abilities he might need in perilous situations. The concealment ability, which the untraceable drakes have, seems to be extremely good. If a beast with a similar ability at an even higher rank exists, it would be terrifying and even better for me to bind. Other than that, Shane's ability to summon spatial portals is also nothing to scoff at and extremely terrifying. Furthermore, I never know what might happen, and having other abilities like night vision or being able to breathe underwater are also essential, right? Listing a few affinities and suitable abilities, Jason couldn't help but sigh, because there were just too many things he wanted to get right off the bat, and his patience seemed negligible. If he had enough soul energy units, it wouldn't be much of a problem because it would be simpler to search for beasts with high potential, but unfortunately enough, this was not the case right now. Before searching for a fourth soul bond, Jason wanted to have accumulated enough soul energy units to supply his Black Origin Flame, and his other 2 soul bonds. After that, he wouldn't be content with beasts that had a low potential, which meant that he might have to search for stronger beast offspring in dangerous areas, which required him to be stronger than he currently was. As such, he could only sigh deeply, as he continued to read the Beastarium until he arrived at the Flay's house. It was already dark outside, yet Jason heard loud noises from the backyard which was lightened up, and attracted his attention, as he activated his mana eyes, while slowly approaching the area, where the small combat grounds were situated. There, he could see someone with an unstable amplified mana core that increased by multiple levels in size, fighting against a 3rd master rank. Concluding what he saw, it had to be Greg and Malia sparring with each other, as he finally saw them when he walked around the corner. Monitoring their spar, Malia was obviously holding back, while trying to pressure Greg in order to adjust to his new strength and to consolidate his mana core at the same time. Even if Greg's mana core rank was only at the 7th adept rank, his mana core size increased by such a large degree, that he was almost comparable to average 1st expert ranks, while his physique received a much higher amplification as Greg's soul bond and soul world were based on the physique. As such, Jason estimated his physical strength to be comparable to an average 2nd expert rank, without the need to use his berserk ability, which most likely also received a boost. Smiling lightly, he observed the whole spar, only to notice that Malia was unable to perfectly adjust herself to Greg in order to force him to use his whole strength, while she accidentally used too much strength in some clashes. After 5 minutes, the spar was already over, and Malia noticed that Jason observed their battle, which caused her to charge up to him. As she sighed in relief, "It's your turn," Malia said with a faint smile on her lips before a radiant smile emerged, as she disappeared inside the house. Looking after Malia, who left the 2 youths alone, he couldn't help but smile dryly, as his attention turned towards Greg, who still stood in the combat arena with gleaming eyes. "I'll change my clothes and then we can spar." "All right," Jason said, without being able to hold back his own excitement. It looked like Taurus finished its transformation, even if it was unable to reach its racial limits, and its mana core rank remained at the low unblemished rank. This was already enough for Greg to receive the large amplification from his soul world. However, more important was that Taurus was not a reinforced horned bull anymore, but that it evolved into a lesser minotaur, even if it was still not matured. Nevertheless, Jason was still stronger than Greg, as his soul amplified him a much higher share than his friend received, which allowed him to attain the physical strength of an average 3rd expert, after refining his body with the Netherworld's 4th body refining technique. As for his mana core size, it was much larger than Greg's even if he was 1 level higher than Jason, but this was not something that mattered to the 2 youths right now. Jason wouldn't hold back even a little bit because he wanted to force his friend to use his berserk ability, as he was extremely curious about the changes Greg's ability received, even if it might end with someone sustaining minor injuries. In his opinion, a real spar required at least a few bruises and not holding back to come out of the spar unscathed. Outside the dome, something like this wouldn't happen either. Why should they have to suppress their strength within a spar then? After changing into a combat suit, Jason halted his steps opposite Greg, barely 40 meters apart, as they shouted, "Go!" almost exactly at the same time, before charging at each other. Greg was still using his gloves, while Jason unsheathed his pseudo-mana grade 1 daggers, because using his Viridistar weapons after supplying them with too much mana might not only slash through Greg's gloves but also bones, muscles, and so on, which was not necessary. As such, his self-made daggers were the best choice. Exerting the weightless steps movement technique at the profound mastery, Jason's speed increased by roughly 40%, as he summoned multiple icicles around him at the same time, shooting them towards Greg, who easily shattered them with high-velocity punches, while exerting his Emperor Ape martial art technique. Both felt excited, which they could see in each other's face. Summoning more icicles of various sizes, Jason shot all of them at once towards Greg, who was barely 5 meters away from him, as he further circulated a large amount of mana within his lower body to increase his speed by a small margin. Crossing the distance of 5 meters in a moment, Greg, who was already overwhelmed by the sheer number of icicles, barely perceived him, as all of his hair on his body stiffened when he noticed the coldness in Jason's eyes. Greg didn't hesitate for another moment, and he utilized his Berserk skill, which increased his strength by almost 80%, as his whole body enlarged. Issuing a loud roar, he shattered the icicles shooting towards him into smithereens. Jason, who was barely half a meter away from Greg, about to slash at his calves, noticed Greg's change, which caused him to feel threatened. Trying to retreat, Greg's speed increased by a large margin, as he kicked out at Jason, blasting him away several meters because he was unable to avoid the attack at all. Knowing that it was still not over, Jason pushed himself from the ground, not wasting a single second, as he already felt something gigantic behind him. Goosebumps covered his whole body, as he used a quarter of his mana in order to erect a thick, compressed ice wall. Charging away from the ice wall, with his weightless steps technique exerted to the limits, Jason could only hear metal crashing in the ice wall, creating a large hole within the thick wall before several more holes followed, one after another. Is he still unable to control his berserk state? Jason began to wonder while taking deep breaths, trying to calm himself down. Even if his physique is extremely terrifying in this state, without being able to think reasonably, it's still the same as before. With this in his mind, Jason released his ice affinity slowly, enveloping the whole combat arena with white fog, while his mana eyes still perceived his friend perfectly and he knew exactly where Greg was. He sincerely hoped that Greg would be able to get the hang of himself in order to show him his true strength, because his physical strength reached a terrifying height and Jason was only able to do something against it, thanks to the affinities he currently had. However, if his ice affinity was already enough to win against Greg, his opponents at the Big 3 tournament should be able to do the same. Staring at his inflated friend, Jason stood on guard, without missing a single minute detail, while slowly walking around the combat arena, as his eyes brightened up when he noticed that Greg, who threw around an ice block before, calmed down, without the need to come out of the berserk state. Perceiving the mana fluctuation he released, Jason stepped back in order to figure out how high Greg's mana sensitivity and control currently were and if his released mana fluctuations could cover the whole area. After several seconds, Jason nodded his head, when Greg was unable to expand his fluctuations further, as Jason severed the connection to his ice affinity in the mist, which would slowly dissipate, as he fully exerted his weightless step technique, before a Greg who stood around motionless, fully concentrated on scanning his surroundings. Manifesting a dozen black fireballs around him, the mist revealed Jason, when he already appeared in front of Greg, who could barely open his bloodshot eyes, as he issued a loud, FCK. Chapter 259 Do Whatever You Want. By Hydesgrain. After utilizing the berserk ability Greg inherited from the Lesser Minotaur, his physique was stronger than Jason's by a large margin, and only by using multiple affinities, Jason was able to fight Greg head-on. However, due to Greg's low proficiency with his berserk ability, Jason was at an advantage as he noticed that Greg was forced to stay motionless within the mist in order to release his mana. Thanks to that, he figured out that Greg's control over his ability was still unstable, even if it was much better compared to before. Appearing in front of Greg with his body leaned forward, as they stared at each other with a serious expression, Jason released all dozen, fist-sized black fireballs at once in order to attack Greg's vital spots, without aiming at his head. In the worst case, his friend would receive a few burns, and shooting a peak-evolved ranked fireball at his friend's head would be considered overkill because they only sparred with each other. Not even bothering if the fight was over or not, Jason pushed himself from the ground with his weightless steps technique fully utilized, as he switched from Greg's front to his backside, when the fireballs exploded, creating a large smoke screen which covered his disappearance. Unable to see each other under normal circumstances gave Jason many benefits thanks to his mana eyes and his seemingly perfect vision. As such, he even perceived how light Greg's injuries were thanks to his disrupted mana in the areas his fireball hit as he pierced with both daggers into Greg's calves, without thinking about dulling them at all. If Greg wanted to learn how to control his berserk ability, he had to remain level-headed even after sustaining light and severe injuries, which Jason wanted to force right now. Being able to finish off Greg, Jason decided to back off after inflicting 2 rather light injuries, as he released Thick Mist once again fully guarded against possible counterattacks. However, this time, he also concealed his mana fluctuations to a certain degree, with the help of his concealment technique. Monitoring how Greg behaved and desperately tried to control his own body while being in the berserk state was not something Jason liked to see, but if he wanted to help his friend, this was necessary. Yet, after seeing that his friend was unable to control himself after Jason injured him, he could only sigh, as he actively supported his passive mana gathering technique, while his sub-area in his mind did the same. With this, he could replenish his mana faster than it was used up in order to manifest the thick mist surrounding him. Their spar ended after barely 5 minutes when Greg's berserk state began to recede, releasing him from his suffering, as he slumped on the ground, taking deep breaths. Jason meanwhile stopped utilizing his ice affinity, before he walked towards Greg when the mist began to dissipate. Looking at each other, Greg gnashed his teeth as he frustratingly acknowledged, "I'm still unable to control my berserk state, BFCK." However, Jason perceived the whole situation differently, as he said reassuringly, "Don't be so frustrated. It has only been a few hours since you received the enhanced version of your berserk ability from Taurus, and it's already quite good that you could control yourself to such a high degree. If you think back to the time when you used your berserk ability for the first time against me, you'll notice that your proficiency increased by a lot. If you work hard, a few weeks will be more than enough to further improve your control, and then you'll be extremely powerful and maybe even the strongest first year on Asterix. Who knows?" Reassuring and motivating Greg was what he needed right now in order to stay motivated, and the two talked to each other while Jason supported Greg to walk inside towards Gabriella, who looked shocked at her son, whose calves were pierced by a sharp object, while his skin was partially burned. Staring daggers at Jason, he didn't know what to say, when Greg came to his rescue, as he explained how this helped him out in order to control his berserk state. Thinking about this, Gabriella could only sigh and think that it was better if Jason attacked her son without killing him in order to improve his control over his abilities, which might save his life in the future when something dangerous might happen, instead of someone else torturing him, even if she hated to see her son being injured more than anything. It hurt her heart deeply, but she knew that it was important to become stronger in a world that was reigned by the strong. After bringing Greg to Gabriella, Jason took a shower and changed into a clean set of clothes before he returned to his room, where he took out the messenger crystal he hasn't used for over a month, where he told Dahlia everything about old Drake and the Drake Patriarch. Injecting mana into the messenger crystal, he called his masters once again, because he had to figure out if they had any instructions for him, or that he should just hold back during the tournament in order to stay low profile. After the runes brightened up, they manifested, and Jason had to wait for several minutes before he finally heard Shane's voice. "Hello, Jason. What's going on? How are you doing?" Being able to hear Shane, who sounded healthy without pain in his voice, Jason sighed in relief, as he began to talk with his master about the main issue he noticed for. "Hello master, I'm doing fine. I hope your reattached arm is completely healed and that you're back at your top form. However, I called today for a different reason. As you two may know, I'll enter the Big 3 tournament which will start tomorrow, but to be honest I'm not sure how much strength I should use. I'm already aware of the fact that the established fortified soul conjunctions with my soul bonds shouldn't be revealed, but other than that I'm not sure. My physique is currently comparable to an average 3rd expert rank, while my affinities reach the mid-late evolved rank. I know that this is not really something special on Canir, if I were to compare myself to prodigies there, but it's still relatively uncommon for someone without any backing. If there was not the issue with old Drake, I wouldn't really bother about this, but because I feel so uncomfortable, I decided to call you two. Hearing the urgency, worry, and slight frustration in Jason's voice, Shane couldn't help but smile dryly through the messenger crystal, while Dahlia approached him from behind. She also listened to what Jason said and they already discussed multiple scenarios with each other, as Shane said reassuringly. Just do whatever you want to do. You don't even have to hold back if you find an opponent you genuinely want to beat. Just ignore the older generation and the others who bother you. We thought of multiple ways to get you out of Asterix, if old Drake tries to scheme against us. After Shane finished, Dahlia from behind shouted, in the worst case, you can just fake your death. We are proficient in doing something like this, hee hee. Otherwise, Shane will use force to get you out of there. His spatial affinity never betrayed us. Don't worry, little one. Shane is healthy, even though he still didn't recuperate completely. We already prepared something large for the Drake family patriarch, if he were to come for you, hee hee. It might be cruel, but everyone will receive what they sowed. Hearing his masters speak, Jason was once again taken aback as he noticed that the two seemed to have several personalities because they were sometimes extremely serious, and then suddenly childish, when it came to forging or bestow creators. However, in his opinion, Dahlia only wanted to ease his tension because she noticed his anxiety. In the end, it was only obvious for him to feel nervous, considering that there might be a sovereign rank after him, who was said to have a full-fledged dragon as his soul bond. Worse was, however, that the Drake family patriarch was stronger than Shane according to the mana core size and number of solidified prismarine crystals within their mana core. This didn't necessarily mean that Shane was weaker, but it was definitely a disadvantage, as his soul bonds were also weaker than a sovereign-ranked dragon. Additionally, the Drake family patriarch had high-quality transmuted. Smiling through the messenger crystal, Jason was thankful that his masters allowed him to go all out if he wanted to, as he suddenly remembered something he wanted to tell them. I almost forgot it, he said to himself, slapping his forehead. Chapter 260 Retorting his master by Hydesgrain. Hearing a thumb slap through the messenger crystal, both Dahlia and Shane were confused, which caused them to simultaneously blurt it out, Jason. Are you alright? Noticing that he was still in a call with his masters, Jason told them that he was fine before he decided to reveal everything about the 2 Terragrade manuals his masters gave him to study. Not knowing where to start, Jason chooses to let his masters know the facts, straight without holding back. I have something else to tell the two of you, which has nothing to do with the Big 3 tournament. When Dahlia told me that I received the 2 original Terra A Blessed manuals, I first started to read the translations and I noticed that something was off because it seemed like the translations were somewhat off. As such, I remembered that I could understand the foreign races talking to each other, and even though I don't know why, I started to look at the original text. In the end, I was once again overwhelmed by pain, with many streaming inside me, but that's not important right now. More important is that I was able to read the original text within the techniques that hail from other races. Jason took a few deep breaths, as he noticed the silence on the other side, which caused him to wonder if there was something wrong with the transmission when Shane faintly uttered, "What? Wait, continue." It was probably shocking for them to figure out that he was able to read the manual's original texts, and Jason understood their concern as he continued. The 2 blessed techniques, like we called it previously, are called Terra Intermediate, Netherworld's Forte, and Terra Basic, Darkness Proselytism. As such, the grade is not called blessed, but terror, and the darkness proselytism technique allows someone with a single darkness affinity to transmute one's mana in darkness mana with certain unique effects that might awaken during the process. Unfortunately, someone with multiple affinities can't practice it, and it's harmful to anyone who wants to use multiple affinities while practicing this technique if they were to disregard the well-meant advice, written over several pages. Meanwhile, the Netherworld's Forte technique is a body refining technique that allows foreign races to strengthen and refine their body, which allows them to be as strong as beasts at the same rank. In the Netherworld's Fort introduction part, it was clearly written that almost all races are innately weaker than foreign beasts, and comparing their strength to humans, they should be slightly stronger, at most, with a few exceptions. However, due to their body refining techniques, they can fight against beasts head-on without the need to rely on their quantity to fight monarch-ranked beasts, for example, as humanity was forced to do so. I also studied the introduction of both Terrorgrade techniques and have to say that the intel I received is terrifying. Becca. Stop. Shane suddenly shouted in anger, and it was obvious that he was uncomfortable with what he heard. Can you please not throw the information at us as if we would understand everything immediately? Even if we're old, what you're talking about is new, and shocking. Please be more considerate. Shane felt as if his whole world was shattered with the information Jason already told, and he didn't seem to have even started. However, he had to stop his disciple for a moment, as he noticed Dahlia's shaking hand resting on his shoulder, smiling lightly as he saw both fear and excitement gleaming in her eyes. Both didn't know what the hell was going on, but hearing that the foreign races were not innately much stronger than humans was good to hear, while Jason's current intel already scared Dahlia, because she didn't want to hear what was coming now because she could already estimate where his words were going to. Holding her hand, Shane forced himself to calm down, as he asked his disciple, "So, you want to tell us that the foreign races are innately weaker than beasts and that the body refining technique, or whatever it is called, is the reason for their strong physique?" Shane seemed to have gathered his senses to a certain degree as Jason answered slowly. "Yes, that's exactly the case, and I can also prove the efficiency of the body refining technique. By practicing the Netherworld's Forte technique with an astronomical amount of mana stones and nutrition, I was able to refine my physique to a certain degree, but I noticed that this doesn't work for the amplification I received from my soul bonds, which is a slight downside. As such, my physique, which should only be at the 6th adept rank due to my mana core rank, became stronger and more endurable. Adding the amplifications I received from the soul world core and my soul bonds, I should be able to fight low-evolved beasts head-on soon, without using any mana. Isn't that great? Jason was really excited about the things he found out when he heard Dahlia shouting through the messenger crystal. "Do you want to kill yourself?" Hearing this caused him to stumble back, until he fell on his bed, as he looked at the messenger crystal in shock. "Why is she shouting so loud?" I was careful. Calming down, she added, "Jason. Why are you always acting so reckless? Couldn't you have waited for us or at least discussed something important like this? What if this body refining technique was harmful to your body? You could have permanently damaged your whole body and maybe even your soul world. You don't know anything about the technique, and practicing it without any preparations is plain stupid." Frowning, Jason found that Dahlia exaggerated a little bit, as he retorted, "The Shaw family also practiced this technique, and they didn't even do it right. Yet, they were still considered a big clan, even if they were one of the weaker ones. I read through the body refining technique multiple times and only practiced it for a short period in order to figure out if there was an issue. After each session, I carefully observed my whole body and tested if there was anything amiss, with either my affinities, movement, health, or mana circulation. I understand that I could have called you two to figure out more together, but I don't even know how many times a messenger crystal can be used before breaking because the two of you didn't tell me that. Should I have asked Till or Old Drake how often a messenger crystal can be used? If I did that, I could have just given him my messenger crystal, because it would become entirely useless. Even if he was aware that he acted recklessly, his masters were not entirely without fault. If he called them because of every single problem, the messenger crystal would have already crumbled, without him being able to discuss how to handle the issue with old Drake at the Big Three tournament. As such, he had to be careful with each call he made, as he heard Dahlia sighing deeply. "I'm sorry, Jason, somehow I couldn't help myself. Maybe the information you already said is too much for me to digest. So you refined your physique with the body refining technique. If you're feeling good, that's fine. Hearing that you can almost fight against low-evolved beasts without the usage of mana is amazing. We have to test this further, once you arrive at our new hideout." Shane at the other side of the messenger crystal looked at Dahlia, worried because it has been a long time since she was unable to control her emotions, as he rubbed her back gently. "Jason, is there anything else you want to tell us? Please be considerate to us," Shane said, still looking at Dahlia. However, Jason was still unaware of the shock he created within his masters, and being considerate was not his strength, as he just continued to lay down the facts he figured out. Both techniques have the same mana core ranking system, while they also wrote about lower planets and that their number is unimaginably vast. Meanwhile, if I'm not wrong, the introductory part also labeled Argos as an infant among the lower planets. The cultivation system description and the part about the planets were only a few sentences inside the whole introduction, but isn't that interesting? Apparently, what we separated in 3 to 4 ranks is only considered a single stage according to the foreign race mana core ranking. Their mortal stage is consistent with our novice, adept, expert and master rank, while their second stage is labeled league state, starts at the magus rank with the compression and liquefaction of the first drop of mana and... "Jason!" Shane shouted once again, causing Jason to frown, as he innocently, yet slightly annoyed asked, "What? I told you to be considerate. Since when is revamping our complete system and indicating that humans are less insignificant than we already imagined, considerate? Argos is an infant among the lower planets. An unimaginable vast number of lower planets," Shane shouted, without being able to hold back anymore, as his disciple seemed to have become denser since they parted ways. Hearing Shane shouting at him, he thought for a moment, as he subconsciously uttered an, "Oh, true." Dahlia behind Shane still shivered slightly as she tried to tell Jason to not mind her husband. "Don't mind Shane. It's just too much for us to understand, that we are considered insignificant by the other races. We already knew that the gap between us and them was wide, but the revamped mana core ranking system you talked about is just too much." Listening carefully to Dahlia, Jason's eyes widened, as it seemed that she sobbed, which caused him to feel guilty and uncomfortable about his density when he noticed the runes on the messenger crystal flickering. Shane seemed to notice the same, as he told Jason, as calm as possible, trying to suppress his shaking voice, "Give your best at the Big Three tournament and don't let anyone beat you up. When I take you to our new hideout, we'll have to talk about all the things you got to know from the 2 blessed, or Terragrade techniques. Don't message us for now because we can't be sure if someone else might accidentally connect to our frequency if the Drake family patriarch were to appear to watch the Big Three tournament."